Thank you, Mr. Nareja. A compelling case for why India isn't just attracting capital, but retaining it through performance and resilience. Thank you so much. We now turn to one of the real asset classes that continues to evolve faster than ever, the Indian office market. From GCC-led demand and AI-driven productivity shifts to ESG expectations and flex lease models, this conversation will decode the new economics of workspaces, and that's next for capital allocation and asset strategy. Let's welcome our distinguished panelists. Please welcome Mr. Mohit Arora, Managing Director, Real Estate, Blackstone. Please welcome Ritesh Sachdev, Senior Vice President, Head of Leasing, Asset Management, Sustainability and CSR, Tata Realty. Please welcome Ruchita Manyar, Head Investments, Capital Land, Ascendas First Space. Please welcome Vinod Rohira, MD and CEO, K. Raheja Corporation. And our moderator for this panel, Nishant Kabra, Managing Director, Investment, Sales and Debt Advisory, Capital Markets India, JLL. Over to you, Nishant.
Yeah, thank you. Very good afternoon, everyone. Over the last 5.5 weeks, and this is probably my fourth conference now, increasingly with every week, it was becoming difficult to talk about future growth and business with a lot of positivity. So firstly, I think when I got up in the morning, I was glad a ceasefire was announced. I think we can go back to being cautiously optimistic. So Vinod, if I can bring you in, with that, how have the boardroom conversations been last 5.5 weeks? And now with this, how are you reading the near future?
I think in a weird way, if I was to be candid, things like these really burst the bubble and you start touching your feet on the ground, which is really very important because we were running away at a speed which may or may not have been fruitful in the long term, if you ask me. So it allows you to start focusing on what's in your hand to deliver, reassessing each of your execution strategies, and figuring out what you really want to do, and focusing on real tangible output and growth. So I think that's one big benefit, at least for India and in real estate, that we can take away from this grossly uncertain world environment, which is sad, but if you're asking me in the boardroom, this helped.
Mohit, your view, Blackstone across geographies, of course, you've gone deep into India. How has it been, last 4-5 weeks?
No, I would agree with Vinod a lot. I think it was a good moment to kind of reflect back how far we have come and gave us a little bit of a time to understand that everything always will not go in one direction. There will always be those choppy times, and that's what will, I would think, eventually will distinguish between the long-term investors and fly-by-the-night kind of investors. So as long as, and we have seen it now, as Blackstone, we are big enough kind of a mandate here. We have some companies already listed, some that we own privately, and some were in the queue to get listed, right? So we are seeing that impact across the entire spectrum. And I think if you own the right product in the right markets and just have the ability to just sit back and let this storm pass by, I think over the medium to long term, I think our conviction continues to stay strong.
Interesting. And Mohit, if I can stick with you and talk a little bit about office. You've been one of the biggest investors and have seen multiple exits. And office has been the cornerstone of Indian real estate. So demand has never been an issue. And I think more in the current times, it's the durability of that demand. So how does Indian office stack up in your overall global portfolio today, and where do you see that going?
I think India office has obviously come a long way when we started back in 2011. I would still say that it continues to stick into that growth bucket. It's still not a core product, I would say. It's still core plus growth, but I think the USP today is that the market has got deeper. And what India today offers is probably the yields which are higher than most of the developed markets, plus a growth which is well precedented and very, very durable. So you are seeing all-time high absorptions, you are seeing rents going up, you are seeing the liquidity in terms of REITs and some of the larger institutional capital being available. So a lot of this growth is durable. And I think the best reflection of that is the pricing on the REITs, where you see the yields today are very comparable to what you can own a GSEC for. It's just for the growth that the investors get flocked to the REITs and get that distinguished. So it's not only about the defensibility of the yield, I would say. Increasingly, people are getting more convinced about the durability of the growth. And that's why that's where we think that increasingly is a distinction that's coming in our conviction as well with respect to India office.
But are the returns compressing?
I would say selectively. You are not seeing that broad spectrum of where the returns are compressing. And again, this return compression is not linked to there being a lack of underwriting discipline. I think this compression is essentially linked to the risk premiums coming down. You now clearly have a capital or a pool of capital which clearly identifies the assets in the right market. And especially in this post-COVID and this AI era, you are seeing this rent growth or absorption or even the exit liquidity, it getting concentrated in few markets and few assets, right? So if those are the assets, those are the markets, people want to pay up for the certainty, right? So as a result of which your yields are coming down, the REITs in the last 12, 18 months have compressed by 35 to 50 basis points. A little bit of that is getting compensated by growth, but a part of this is also because the risk premiums have come down and people are okay to solve for a lower cost of capital just because the markets have become a lot more deeper and mature.
So even with that background, does India remain competitive today? Let's say for distressed US or a repriced Europe, does India still remain competitive from a capital allocation point of view?
I would say yes and no. India is now a big enough market which you can't ignore. But at the same time, I don't think it's competing for the same pool of capital. You can't still, it doesn't have that depth and maturity where you can start comparing it to safe havens of core capital, whether it exists in US or Europe. But I think now the market is big enough which you can't ignore. So personally for us in Blackstone, we had some mandate on core capital in Asia. Which used to be largely around the discussions were around investments in either Korea, Hong Kong, Singapore, Japan, Australia. But now increasingly, investors want to understand what we can do in India, right? So it's not I would not say it's the default option, but it's increasingly becoming a discretionary one where people want to understand what more they can do, what are the returns that can potentially anticipate, and some of the core capital is now getting interested in India.
Noted. Thanks, Mohit, for that. Vinod, if I can bring you back in. So, coming out of COVID, year after year, we've seen record absorption levels. Are there any structural risks, in your view, on Indian office? Maybe over-dependence on GCCs, maybe geographical concentration, just some examples. Are there any structural risks that we are not seeing?
I think I don't see them as risks, I see them as opportunity. It's the same bucket. Let me demonstrate what I'm trying to tell you. I think we just saw the first layer of recalibration of rents from COVID to today. I think there is another layer of recalibration that's going to take place, which will be driven by the backbone of the recalibration of grade A asset class. That level of assets now that are getting built or just got delivered are changing the game, right? Layer that with the backbone of infrastructure, which is changing micro market dynamics in markets where infrastructure is really playing out, right? Add a layer to that with your cumulative growth of the domestic markets. You have not yet seen participation of domestic occupiers. There will be a significant push to demand in the next 4 to 5 years if you believe that our economy will touch the 7, 8, 9, 10 trillion band. Of course, the dollar keeps running away, so that number will keep changing. But having said that, there will be significant gunpowder of demand, of buying as well as leasing, domestic occupiers, which we are not even looking at currently, which will be, in my view, 40% of the demand rise. And lastly, the right asset management piece with the right allocation of capital is getting more and more difficult. So it's becoming a far more concentrated play, a far more consolidated play, a far more high capital investment play, which opens up opportunity. And in a weird way, inflation is your best friend, because you're going to push rents up, you're going to push costs up, you're going to put your money where you really know it's going to give you the end result. Because if you're looking at owning the asset, not a strata title exit, you want to build and start earning your first dollar after 5 or 6 years, you'll be 200% sure of where you want to put your capital, and that diminishes supply. And the demand dynamic is going to keep playing out in the right markets for the right assets. So if you're in that spectrum of space, I think you don't have to worry for the next 5 years.
And are you increasingly seeing, in your portfolio, office portfolio, concentration of Indian corporates? Are they year on year increasing?
Absolutely. I think when we were pouring concrete on Altimus early, I don't know how many of you are aware of that or not, we were right in the middle of COVID. We would have underwritten the building with 90% global occupiers. Today, the building is 40% domestic. And if we would have leased 1 year forward from today, we would have had 60% domestic. So Indian companies are willing to rub shoulders to get the best talent for the best asset, willing to pay the best price. Okay? That's a clear demonstration of shift, that we believe in our growth story and we want the best talent, we want to be in the best place. And you will see increasingly that playing out.
Great. And the moment you mentioned Altimus, our friend from GIC is there. I could see the big smile on his face. So, of course, fantastic asset. We can't talk about office in future without AI. Ritesh, if I could bring you in. When you're planning for projects, right, or in your leasing projections, have you started underwriting maybe lesser square footage per capita? Do you see that disruption playing out?
Well, I'd like to start with the amount of optimism and buoyancy that I see in the room. Of course, Sigrid and Neil, and this is not just because I've done this for occupiers, and I have the pleasure of sort of leasing and doing a lot of work with IPCs, etc. The short answer is two things. If there is anyone who says that there is a major disruption the way that COVID did disrupt with AI coming in, will there be a reset? For sure, because no one knows for sure the extent that that'll happen. But the fact of the matter also is, I'll answer that question. Have we started to plan for lesser square footage densities, etc. because of this? The answer is no. For the simple reason that, I think Neil was mentioning this earlier, we know for a fact, it was just mentioned now, that there is flight to quality. What's happening essentially, Neil mentioned China +1. If you were to look at that from a GCC perspective now, India now has significantly moved up the value chain from a BPO to a KPO to now. India is now being seen as your global second headquarter to that extent. Now, when there is a war for talent, increasingly there is a flight to quality, which means that Indian and global occupiers would want the best real estate available, institutional real estate. What that also means, you're mirroring global standards when you design for your offices. So will AI have a disruption? Perhaps yes, no one knows. But interestingly today, the efficiencies, etc., that are globally accepted in their global headquarters is what is being built for today. GCCs today are almost about 50%. So, Vinod was speaking about this earlier today. There is no dependence on IT, one of the major shifts that happen. In our portfolio, we now have perhaps a 30% of IT, but increasingly manufacturing related, defense and aerospace, pharma. So the strength, resilience of that sector and the dependence only on one has gone away significantly. So as a matter of fact, it is turning around the other way, where efficiencies, expectations from your workplaces are mirroring what you do at your global headquarters. Nishant.
Interesting. I'll just extend that to Ruchita, and one more sort of aspect on that. When you're underwriting today, on your future acquisitions, are you underwriting less demand per person, similar extension to that? And two, second part of it, if AI actually ends up reducing headcount and thereby increasing profitability for a lot of organizations, will better tenants start taking up less space?
Well, I think, the impact, okay, let's put it this way. The adverse impact of AI is probably yet to be seen. I think, as always, technology worries most of us. And as Bill Gates says, we overestimate the impact in the short run and kind of underestimate in the long run, right? So I think if we kind of step back just in the last 5 years, from say pre-COVID or even earlier, maybe 2017, 2018 to now, we've seen a significant structural shift in the labor, right, or in the workforce. I mean, I would bucket it in 2-3 characters, right, or categories. First one really would be, say, your entire AI agentic workforce, right? The folks who actually integrate the AI, the search engines, the infrastructure, manage the data center, which didn't exist, those roles didn't exist before 2017. The second bucket really would be the entire consumer internet economy, which all of us are so hooked on, right? It could be, your short reel strategist to your influencer marketing. I think the sum and substance of these, examples are to say that, yes, we will surely have, reduction in the low-value jobs, but increasingly, you will have high-value added jobs which will be recharacterized, and that's going to be the new norm, right? And hence, by nature, the high-value added jobs will have a higher space requirement, which is what we are seeing in the GCC framework currently, right? Where they would probably be solving for a similar 100 to 125 square feet on account of various requirements. It could be a well-being requirement because, you have a bunch of requirements around comfort, health, etc., as well as catering and attracting the talent. So I think despite AI, adverse impact, I wouldn't kind of, foresee. My read of the room is it's actually going to be higher requirement because you're going to have higher engineering jobs, you're going to have higher integration and value-added jobs which are going to come to the market because of the talent and the general scarcity around. And hence, the designs will probably be stronger.
Interesting. So you believe that actually absorption purely in terms of quantum may actually increase and continue to grow. Great. Vinod, if I can bring you in again, and you were talking about flight to quality. In the last 3 years, just JLL, whatever office asset we've put out, almost everything has been chased, and liquidity has gotten created around it. Now, with this flight of quality, do you see that general trend to continue, or flight to quality will create that only the top 25, 30, maybe 35% of the good assets, they will only have deep liquidity?
See, I think if I can break your question to 2 parts. One is building the right asset and managing the right asset versus the investor who's looking at buying a certain asset category, right? So to answer the first part, I don't think you have a choice. You'll have to build grade A++. There is no grade A- or A that'll work. All of those peripheral assets, the low cost, will get changed, chopped. We'll see vacancies till the new era evolves, right? So I don't think you have a choice. You have to build grade A+. And grade A that we define today will be very different 5 years forward. You'll have to constantly change your asset because you will be seeing a very different global consumer and a very different Indian consumer in the next 5 years. So what you built yesterday was for yesterday. You can't repeat that and say, I'm fine. You'll have to change. Now, from an investor's point of view, it's a very early stage domestic capital market that's driving out of FOMO buying assets. Okay? That needs to mature at some point in time to figure out the right asset for the asset management and the real management of that asset class to build growth and build strategy around longer term holding and exits. Right now, people are just buying to 3-year flip, 5-year flip, asset looks good, renting has started, great. But the truth lies in actually being able to keep changing the levels of service and keep changing to adapt to changing needs of your consumer. The same guy who's taken space for you, we are seeing in buildings where we've leased 6 months ago and 12 months ago, the guy coming and saying, can I either take another floor or can I give up another floor? And what do I do because my global needs are changing? You need to be constantly looking at what these guys are seeing. You need to be planning way in advance. So it's not about buying an asset. It's actually on a daily basis, you're going to breathe occupancy. That's going to be driven by the dynamics of their business and how that business is evolving. So you need to be on top of that game to be able to manage the asset right, to really create value. And minute you create that value, you'll see massive amounts of compression of yield to be wanting to buy and participate in that asset. But the key will be asset management. It's not going to be investment.
So build quality and build great asset management capabilities. Mohit and Ruchita, if I could extend this to you, Vinod's thought process. From an investor point of view, would you prefer to buy, let's say, an office asset at a 9.5 cap rate, or average asset, 9.5 cap rate, or rather take leasing risk with a high quality asset? What would you prefer?
Good that you said average quality asset 9.5, because otherwise I wouldn't catch you offline and say which asset you're selling for 9.5. But I would say, Nishant, I think the way to look at this is a little bit more on a risk-adjusted basis. It's not an absolute 9% or a higher IRR. I would say on a risk-adjusted basis, and that's the debate, that do I take a lower risk and buy something more core at closer to 9 caps, or I take a little bit of this development risk and leasing risk and probably solve for a higher return. Right? And from that perspective, I think the India office market has matured. You have, I would say, each of the spectrums or each of the limbs where you have the core assets at the yields that we are speaking about. You have something which is in the middle, which is a little bit of core plus a growth, either in terms of releasing or vacant lease up or some asset management upside. Plus there is some then greenfield development ground up that you're doing, solving to a much higher yield. Personally, for us, I would say as Blackstone, it's in the middle bucket that works ideal for us. We don't have a pool of capital that can solve for core returns as yet. So we can't really bind those trophy assets at the tighter cap rates. And I think with the influx of REIT and deepening of that pool of capital, I think it's difficult for the private capital to compete. As well as on the other extreme where you're taking ground up development, I think the timelines to build and stabilize go well past our typical hold horizons. As a result of which, something in the middle, which is brownfield, some buildings are built, some to go, something which is half vacant, half to lease up, something which is broken and can be fixed, that works perfectly for us. And on a risk-adjusted basis, that's the kind of profile of assets we typically look at.
Ruchita?
I think similar for us, but I guess one more, kind of just triangulating your question. If the average asset with the ability to get retrofitted well and, turned into a grade A+ average is a play, we would be very excited. In fact, I think you're going to see a lot of that coming in the next 4 to 5 years, where if you just kind of zoom out and see probably, about 100 to 150 million square feet of our existing stock is, in the vintage of 2010 to 2015. And assuming that's not strata sold, I think that's going to be a great play for all of us who don't like, extreme greenfield risks, but a moderate position where you retrofit it to and then kind of hold on.
So, Ruchita, if we could stick with you and exactly on that. So, two aspects. One, on ESG, does it remain a mere tick box, or it has real implications on exit and liquidity? And two, where the market opportunity you mentioned on repurposing, repositioning maybe some of the assets, how will ESG sort of play out there, where you have to live with certain challenges that may have existed with that asset previously?
See, again, ESG is extremely front and center to the occupiers' RFPs. So I don't think there is any discussion around, circumventing or keeping it as a checkbox. I think it's pretty much the requirement of the customer, or at least giving them a path to get there in a finite period of time, right? So I think it is a critical element. That's absolutely certain. There could be tolerance levels if we are able to get that demonstrated path. In terms of, and that pretty much decides the value of the asset, right? So if you have to be in the market and that's what the customer wants, I don't think there is too much to say, right? Secondly, I think while it started as a customer requirement, increasingly from an asset management perspective, as Vinod has been alluding to, we've also been realizing the operating efficiencies that these aspects bring in. It could be your water recycling, it could be filtering, etc. And I think, or solar, right? I think that benefit is getting accrued to the investor as well as the asset owner from a maintenance and a management perspective, which essentially drives to the point that it is an important parameter.
So from an occupier perspective, it's a must. Does it actually play into when you're underwriting exits? Does it play into that exit strategy, pricing strategy?
Well, it kind of gets into the rental, right? So it's in an indirect way where I am getting the rental because it's a compliant product and hence the necessary cap rates. I would suspect otherwise things would get wider.
Understood. Thanks. Since we are talking about office, want to talk about flex, and Ritesh, if I could bring you in. Do you see flex operators as partners or competitors?
Partners for sure. I just hope there are no flex operators here, otherwise would have said necessary evil. No, but they are partners for sure. For the simple reason, and I just wanted to add another pointer, 150 million that was spoken about, and the change that COVID brought about in terms of the gap that existed between institutionally held grade A assets and with the profile of the workforce, and there still are lines that are getting blurred between retail, sort of hospitality kind retail and offices. With the flex providers coming in and sort of with COVID happening, with the change in the priorities of the newer workforce, I think one of the many good things that COVID did is brought about a lot of such unused assets in the market which were retrofitted and were in a way bought part of the, if I may say so, office mainstream. There is also this opportunity, with speaking about ESG, almost about 350 million plus of non-green assets that are there, which need to be made green for them to be considered as part of what the occupiers today need as a priority area, and of course today. So the reason why I shared this background is, and everyone knows on the absorption that the flex players today are doing, almost about 20%, 20 million of the 85 million square feet. I think very simply put, the traditional way where either the occupier or the developer puts in capital, does the fit outs, approvals, etc., irrespective of whether the developer has that proficiency, would or would not want to put capital in doing fit-outs because the developer would rather put that capital in building in core assets and in the greenfield. What the flex providers have brought in, rightfully so, is speed. We've often been speaking about, and I'm sure Vinod will agree, is the de-risking that they do for occupiers. Of course, it gives them tremendous flexibility, and I do understand now that most developers are trying to de-risk their exposure as much as they possibly can. But there is a lot of merit. The flex providers have, if I may use the word, mastered the art of, I won't say canned solution again, because most today are doing managed solutions instead of the typical flex. But they've mastered that. At the moment, I would believe that it's working well for all from a developer perspective, as long as you're able to de-risk that as much as you possibly can, because the other element that brings in, Nishant, is opens up an asset or a development to multiple more asset classes, potential occupiers, etc. So there are significant benefits overall. Net-net, I see them as partners.
Vinod, if I can bring you in also on this, do you as well see them as demand enhancers, or they complicate the long-term leasing visibility for landlords?
See, I think 15 years ago and 20 years ago, simply put, it was called incubation space, which the developer was putting in because the proof of concept was not there. They wanted to start and test out, right? You fast forward 2 decades, and today, what India has demonstrated is now attracting a very different layer of GCCs. Okay? We were earlier looking at the Fortune 500, and they led the bandwagon. Now, if you see in the last 1 year, on an average, between 500 and 1,000 seats multiplied by 500 occupiers. Most of these guys in the earlier tradition would have either partnered with a third-party service provider, would do a build, own, operate, transfer model. That is getting replaced to some extent by the flexi space being offered as an enterprise solution, where they don't want to get involved in executing to set up infrastructure, right? So that always helps, because you're bringing in so many more GCCs far more faster. It's becoming easier for them to test waters quickly. Eventually, it's great for the developer, because at the end of the day, when you're building large volume, see, earlier your buildings were 4-5 lakh square feet. Now you're building 2.5-3 million square foot assets. Couple of 100,000 square feet in that, kick-started by a GCC, taking help of any of these offices is great for the ecosystem. What you need to be wary about is the speculative play that's going on in this marketplace, right? That speculative play is going to bring cumulatively disruption to the market. That is something that you need to always be cautious about, and that's something that is playing out randomly at points in time, which gives you a bit of an uncertainty in the marketplace. But otherwise, as a concept, it's a value creator for both.
Interesting. Like to, sorry, you wanted to add?
No.
Would like to talk about the new asset classes now. So one question to all of you, and maybe Mohit, you can start and then we can do a round. If you had to allocate, let's say $500 million, have a strategy around that outside of office, on one of the emerging centers, whether it is data center or living, or retail or healthcare, where would you go?
I would go with data centers. I think just given the amount of embedded demand in the amount of data that we consume, the regulatory favor, and the absolute amount of capital that is needed per megawatt. So if you today want to build a gigawatt kind of a data center, you can probably deploy anywhere between $7 to $10 billion. So that kind of scale of capital, you don't have a lot of asset classes that can proudly say that we have that kind of a capacity, right? So from the market depth perspective, while we are in early days, I think there is a massive opportunity to deploy capital at scale in data centers.
Rachita?
I kind of concur with Mohit, right? So data center, of course, is one. And the second one I would add is really the redevelopment of the earlier vintage buildings. I think that's going to be a massive play in the next few years.
Vinod?
All asset classes, yeah. Each one of them in the right micro market, whether it's healthcare, whether it's education, whether it's data center, depends on your appetite for deployment of capital. I don't think there's a dearth of opportunity. There's a huge gap of management bandwidth. And that's what you need to really solve for. Otherwise, each of these asset classes, depending on your appetite, it's like if you have to put in $5 billion, you'll just run behind a data center. When you have $100 million, you'll probably pick 10 of these asset classes in different locations, because even 500, you don't get opportunity in India still to buy 500 million. You might put 100 mil, put 200 million debt, and you've got a massive asset. So we are a long way off from that. But data center, absolutely, because it's an execution opportunity, if you ask me. Buying land, everyone's doing. It's about getting approvals, building the data center, and creating a lease model, whether it's cold shell, warm shell, extended server shell. That's where the capital is really required. And that's where the opportunity is, that in the next 24 months, if you can hand over 2 gig, India will absorb it. But how much is coming is less than half a gig. So that's really where the opportunity is.
I echo with Vinod. I've got more visibility in the office, but I'd say all sectors all put together. If you were to look at India sort of aging, one of the other, that perhaps the return on investment and the ability, the core ability that exists, are also at senior living, because that is a tremendous untapped opportunity overall, given the flight to quality, resi, the units being sold in commercial. So all, if I were to echo with Vinod.
Thank you for that. Interesting. So for my last section, I thought we'll move away from particular asset classes and maybe dip a little in your experience and wisdom. So Ritesh, if one could start with you. Between leasing velocity and quality of the asset from a tenant occupier point of view, how do you manage that?
Let me try and break your question down. Would I go for numbers, leasing velocity, or would I go for investing in?
Yes.
Everything that we've spoken about, this one's a bit of a hard pick because demand is still chasing supply, and supply is perhaps the biggest pull down at the moment for most asset classes because of challenges, etc., that are there. We spoke about the retrofit opportunity, so there is opportunity across. Very simply, if I were to say, I'd say quality, frankly, will define economics. It will define volumes and payback return economics. So hands down, quality.
Okay. Vinod, developer instinct or investor discipline? What has helped you better?
Both are needed. It's 1 + 1, 11. You can't work with one or the other. Yeah.
I was hoping you will say developer instinct, but just if I can bring you in, what has been more difficult, finding deals in India or convincing the IC?
I think it's both. It's cyclical, right? Probably 5 years back, convincing IC, right, out of COVID, and that to office sector when globally things were just going wrong. And now I think it's finding deals.
Finding deals. Mohit, what has been harder, deploying capital or exits?
I would say where we are today, I think we have seen some precedents of exits in various forms and shapes. So I think we are today less anxious about exits. I think you will find the ways and means to do it eventually if you have the right asset. I think given the amount of capital that's chasing and the uncertainties, I think getting the right opportunity is getting difficult. I don't think it's impossible. It's just that you have to look harder and be more creative to generate returns.
I think you guys have pretty much set the benchmark of how exits will happen in the country. So yeah, exiting hasn't been difficult at all. One final question to all of you. And Mohit, maybe we can start with you. what has been that one personal habit that has helped to improve your investment judgment?
I think reading investment memos. So what we have is we have a open book investment committee calls that we have every Monday, and everybody is encouraged to join. And generally, because you're caught up in your own respective stuff, you generally join in on the side so that your attendance is marked and you're not paying attention. But I think what we have done now, at least I personally have done over the last 24, 36 months, is actually spend time on the weekend to read through some of those memos. It just gives you a perspective where the markets are going, what we are seeing globally, and then how is the senior leadership thinking about it, because eventually all the Indian deals are also going to flow through the same channel. So it's just good to have the perspective built into some of your underwriting and eventual IC clearance. I think it helps. So reading the memos has clearly been out there.
I think with me, it has been more to do with writing. For that matter, for any transaction or a deal, I kind of actually write down the risks, the knowns, the advantages, the various parameters. And invariably, what I've kind of circled back in life is that, the unknown risks which were kind of identified have in some evil fashion panned out. So I think that just kind of prepares you as well, because there was that cognizance at that point in time. So yeah, for me, I think it's to do with writing. And I don't just do for my deals. It could be even deals they've done, etc., as to what my approach would be.
That's very interesting. Vinod?
I think going forward, a lot of attention is being spent on learning how to use AI, because that I think is, you don't have an option. You have to do it. As faster you do it, the better it is. And the consumer is changing so fast that you can't just say that, okay, I'm building for this consumer. I mean, we are looking at it from a development point of view. The consumer is changing by the time your product is ready. The product cycles have gone longer. The consumer mindsets are changing far faster. So you constantly need to look outside. You can't just look at what the industry is doing here or whatever else. You need to start working and interacting with the future consumer who doesn't have the ability to participate in real estate today, but he is going to dictate, or he or she is dictating future markets. So I try and spend a lot of time with the seniors to understand how they see the marketplace, how do they see AI, how do they see their future, their jobs, because I think they just come with a very different perspective. And that is going to help us shape products for tomorrow.
Hitesh?
Very simply put, I've been a broker for a very large part of my real estate life, and I've worked with occupiers. So try and listen to as much and spend as much time that you can with the horses and hear from the horse's mouth. Engage as much as you can with our friends in IPCs, because they engage with as many end-use occupiers. Also, as Vinod mentioned, try and speak with as many people as you can from different sectors, because there's no one size fits all. The investment that you'd be able to make and the change in expectations, the sooner you're able to adapt and think and preempt, is the sooner you'll be able to make that change in your asset now. So spending as much time speaking with as many people.
Fantastic. Our time is also up. Thank you all for your candid views.
Thank you. Thank you to our panel for translating data into direction and reminding us that office in India continues to mean opportunity.